next presenter is Feross, who is building WebTorrent, the first torrent that works on the web and in the browser, and he is bringing P2P to the masses with accessible WebRTC-based BP protocols.
Cool, thanks. So I'm Feross, I'm honored to be here. So WebTorrent is torrents on the web, and the point of this talk, it's a little different than my usual talks. I'm not going to be sharing technical details or status updates about the project or discussing new tech in any way. I'm just going to try and share some lessons that we learned. So I introduced WebTorrent at this conference called REALTIME Conf, and I sort of did it as an afterthought. It was the last slide I threw in at the end of a presentation, and it was very clear in the talk that this was an idea that I had just thought of like the day before the conference, and that no code existed. But I put up this slide saying, like, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? And something kind of funny happens. Somebody in the audience tweeted it out, and so this was the first tweet announcing WebTorrent. This guy, Aral, who's a tech privacy advocate, basically tweeted this out to his considerable Twitter following, and they were all super excited to hear about it, except for there was only one problem. This is what the repo looked like. And I didn't cut anything out of the screenshot, so you'll notice there's no actual code. I'll zoom into this part here for you so you can see. So a few hours later, he messaged me in surprise and said, "All you have is a README? Dude, I thought you had code." And I was like, you could have looked at it before you tweeted it out. So I updated the README and I said, "This project does not exist yet," in big letters at the top. It was a bit worrying at first, but I'm actually really grateful that he tweeted it out because it gave me like a push out of the door, and I got a lot of encouragement and feedback from people about the idea. And I don't know if I would have built it if I hadn't gotten that initial push. So the first lesson I'd like to share is that it's important to share your work early and often. Momentum is an incredible asset that people, I think, undervalue, and having pressure, having people expecting you to release stuff is really good. It's good for getting a project off the ground. And having wins to celebrate regularly is really important. At least has been important for us. Another thing is this idea of worse is better. So I love this quote. It's often undesirable to go for the right thing first. It is better to get half of the right thing available so that it spreads like a virus. And once people are hooked in, take the time to improve it to 90% of the right thing. If you want to learn more about this whole idea, there's a great paper called The Rise of Worse is Better. So I recommend reading that. So the way that WebTorrent did this, and the way that we embodied worse is better, is we focused on releasing something that was useful to users today, even though it didn't really capture the full vision of the project. So the first thing we released was this CLI that lets you do BitTorrent on the command line. So I want to emphasize, this worse is better idea doesn't mean that you intentionally write garbage code, but it means that you focus on providing value sooner rather than later, and you initially ship something that falls short of your full vision, and you do this intentionally. So you want your graph to look like this. If I were to visually represent it, you want to be the red line. You're going to be providing some value over time constantly, instead of sort of providing no value and then being like, one day we're going to have this amazingly useful thing. So lesson 2, provide value along the way. The next idea is focus on solving a concrete use case. Think about who your ideal user is. So for WebTorrent, we had a relentless focus on this one use case of torrents on the web. And you can see that immediately in action when you come to the website. We wanted to emphasize that the point of WebTorrent is to reduce the friction of using peer-to-peer technology on the web. And part of the way we do that is by the fact that when you land on the site, you're already participating in peer-to-peer technology. You can see the peers here, you can see the video playing, you didn't have to do anything. So insist on having a simple pitch. Show rather than tell. And if the user can't figure out what your project does from the part of the website that they see above the fold, then consider that your pitch might be too complicated. So yeah, lesson 3, solve one use case perfectly. I believe if you can do this, then you'll be much better off than if you try to do a lot of different things and you do them all in a mediocre way. I personally think that a lot of the DWeb apps that we're building today are a little bit too flaky because they try to bite off more than they can chew, and it makes this stuff really, not good for new users. Thanks. Okay, so the next idea, technical bets are multiplicative. So what do I mean by this? So WebTorrent faced technical risk from many different sources. You might think like, okay, maybe choosing JavaScript as a language is this sort of a bet that we're making, right? Maybe we used Electron, that's a bet. We used WebRTC, that's another bet. So the chance of WebTorrent succeeding is based on the chances of all these technical decisions being good ideas. If any one of these were a really bad idea, then the whole project would fail. So you might plug in real numbers here and say, what's the chance that choosing JavaScript would be a really bad, cause death? That's like 5% maybe. And you plug in all these numbers and you see the chance of us succeeding was 38%. So sort of, yeah, maybe you may disagree with the details here, but the general idea is to don't be so cavalier about throwing in random. Oh, what if we like redesigned HTTP while we're solving this other problem? Think very carefully about sort of the bets that you're taking, because they can really affect the likelihood of success for your project. So that's lesson 4. Another one is to be very careful about prioritizing nerd concerns, as I call it, because the nerdiest users will demand nerd features, and if you're not careful, then the time that it takes to implement and support all these features will suck up all of your time. So we created this nice template to post on GitHub issues to tell people kindly, no thanks, go away. So another issue where we sort of made the right decision here, but it was difficult, was this idea of gathering telemetry. So telemetry means sending basic stats about an application, so you can learn things like how many errors are happening in the real world. And users run into errors all the time and don't report them. It's important to do this. But we had a little bit of fear of pushback from privacy purists. But honestly, no regrets that we shipped this, because we really got the error rate down once we started monitoring this, and this is really important. We have also stack traces as well. And this is our little version showing what versions people are using of this stuff. So basically, lesson 5, ignore the nerds. Listening to the nerds. I'm a nerd, but honestly, even as a nerd, I think ignoring the nerds is a good way to go. Listening to nerds made WebTorrent worse for the non-nerd users, and the non-nerd users are the majority of our users. Another concrete thing, this is some of the data we gathered. The way to think about this is like startups who are creating apps are hyper-focused on their active user numbers and how to get those numbers up. And in many ways, they take it too much of an extreme. They're sort of pathological in their attention to growth. But I think many DWeb projects make little or no effort to grow their user base or to even see whether their stuff is working, and then they complain on Twitter that everyone is using centrally controlled social media apps. And so I think this is pathological in the opposite direction. So generally speaking, if we believe that more users using our apps is a good thing, then I think it's not evil to care about trying to get our apps into the hands of more people, and to make sure that when they're in their hands, that the apps are working correctly. So the first step to knowing, to making things better is knowing how many users you have, how that number is changing over time, and whether the app is actually working. So yeah, the data let us make charts that were extremely motivating, like how many users we were having over time, and it didn't turn us into evil capitalists. It was just let us see when things broke, and it was really useful for us. So lesson 6, growth matters. And so I just want to conclude on a positive note. I think that the opportunity that we have is huge, and I really don't want us to squander it. And it feels like many of the efforts that we've been working on are on the cusp of finally being realized. And I just can't wait to hear more from you in the next couple days about the state of all of the various projects. So thank you.
We don't have time for questions in this session.
Okay, sorry. My bad.
Yeah, but it was also the last one ran a little bit, so
okay.
we're just behind.
Fair enough.
But you should catch Feross after if you have questions about WebTorrent.
Cool. Thank you.